Before dawn on December 19th, 1944, the Ardennes forest seemed to have stopped breathing. Snow clung to the fir branches in heavy silence. The cold had a sound of its own, a brittle stillness that made every movement feel loud, every breath feel visible. Near St. Vith, in the dark woods of eastern Belgium, exhausted American infantrymen pressed into frozen ground and listened for the next approach. They had been fighting for days in a front that was never supposed to erupt. Only a week earlier, the men of the U.S. 106th Infantry Division had been told they were taking over a quiet sector. Instead, they found themselves on one of the most dangerous pieces of earth in Europe. In the darkness beyond the trees, German columns were moving west, convinced that surprise, weather, and sheer force had already decided the matter. And somewhere in that white silence came the hard metallic note that would define the American line that winter. The sound of the M1 Garand firing fast, then ringing empty with its sharp steel ping, a small mechanical voice from a democracy that armed ordinary men in extraordinary numbers. That moment mattered because St. Vith was far more than a Belgian town. It was a road and rail knot, the focal point of 5 highways and 3 rail lines, and in the Ardennes that meant movement, fuel, timing, and survival. The German winter offensive, launched at 5:30 in the morning on December 16th, depended on speed. The plan required American lines to crack, traffic routes to open, and armored spearheads to keep rolling west before the Allies understood the scale of the attack. The 106th Infantry Division, newly arrived and stretched across roughly 22 miles of front where 6 would have been more normal for an American division, was struck before it had fully settled. Frostbite had already appeared. Supplies lagged behind. Villages sat in low sugar bowls, easy to observe and easy to shell. Worse still, warning signs had been dismissed. American officers reported hearing German motor traffic behind the lines, only to be told it might be deception. It was not deception. It was preparation. When the assault came, 2 regiments on the Schnee Eifel were cut off, and by the end of December 17, perhaps 9,000 American soldiers had been trapped east of St. Vith. To German commanders, this looked like confirmation of everything they believed, that green American formations, thinly spread and caught in winter, would give way quickly once the pressure became unbearable. But what German troops expected in the forests around St. Vith and what they actually encountered were not the same thing. They expected panic from rookies and collapse from men cut off in snow. What they met instead was friction, delay, and the stubborn violence of Americans who refused to move on schedule. Not elegant resistance, not heroic in the polished sense, mud-stiffened resistance, frost-bitten resistance, resistance built from tank crews, infantrymen, engineers, cavalry scouts, stragglers, artillerymen, and clerks, thrown together into whatever line could still hold. In that chaos, the American advantage was not comfort but depth. Depth of weapons, depth of ammunition where it could be brought forward, depth of replacement units, depth of industrial power translated into the hands of citizen soldiers. The M1 Garand became the sound of that difference. German infantry had often been trained to judge the pace of Allied fire, to wait for pauses, to feel for weakness. In the Ardennes, many instead heard a steady semi-automatic hammering from the tree line, followed by that brief metallic ping, and then another rifle answering from somewhere else. Not one perfect marksman, but a nation in uniform. The defenders around St. Vith did not hold because they were untouched by fear. They held because fear did not empty the road network behind them of meaning. If St. Vith stood even briefly, the German timetable bled away by the hour. The record shows how costly that delay became for the attackers. General Hasso von Manteuffel's timetable had called for St. Vith to fall by 1800 hours on December 17th. It did not. The Germans did not take the town until the night of December 21st, and they did not fully control the area until December 23rd, after the American defensive horseshoe withdrew on orders. That lost time was not a detail. It was one of the reasons the larger offensive failed to achieve its speed and coherence. Manteuffel later admitted that the success of the operation depended on rapid progress through and beyond St. Vith, and that this requirement was not met because of the American delaying action there. The fighting was so punishing that one reconnaissance troop entered the line on December 17th with 6 officers and 136 men, and by December 23rd had been reduced to 47 enlisted men and no officers. Even German prisoners recognized what the defense had done. One lieutenant colonel, in frustration, is recorded as saying, "You and your damned Panzer Division have kept us from getting to Liège." The irony was cruel and profound. The Germans had come expecting to use the Ardennes as a corridor of motion, but St. Vith turned the forest into drag, then into delay, then into doubt. The Americans themselves were changed by it as well. The 106th had entered the line as a division inheriting a quiet sector. It emerged blooded, shattered in places, but no longer untested. In those frozen days, the difference between inexperience and resolve narrowed. Men who had expected routine learned that war could age a division in a single morning. That is why the battle still matters. Not because every American position held, many did not. Not because every decision was wise, some were ruinous. It matters because the German offensive reached St. Vith expecting arithmetic and found conviction instead. It found clerks fighting as riflemen, armored crews turned into roadblock defenders, new infantry divisions learning under fire that survival could become strategy. On December 23rd, Eisenhower praised the men in the defensive horseshoe, telling them that the magnificent job they were doing was having a great beneficial effect on the whole situation. He was right. By then, the delay at St. Vith had already helped buy the time the Allies needed to harden their line, redirect reserves, and begin closing the jaws on Hitler's last great gamble in the West. And so the image that remains is not only of snow and shellfire, or of maps and ruined timetables, but of that recurring sound in the winter woods. The crack of the Garand and the brief iron ping that followed, small as a kitchen utensil, plain as factory steel, and somehow immense. It was the sound of a republic at war, of assembly lines turned into resistance, of farmers, miners, mechanics, students, and shop clerks holding a crossroads that ideology said should have fallen. In the end, that was the larger truth buried under the Ardennes snow. Tyranny believed speed and shock could overrun free men before they understood what was happening. But freedom, even when cold, even when surprised, possessed a deeper reserve. Not merely of fuel or rifles or shells, though it had those too. A reserve of will, a reserve of citizens, a reserve of abundance that dictators could count in tonnage, but never fully measure in spirit.